All right, and moving on, Israel's defense minister Israel Katz has said that a ceasefire agreement with Lebanon grants the military the freedom to strike Beirut if Hezbollah attacks Israeli communities, while clearing that operation in southern Lebanon will continue. Lebanon's state-run national news agency NNA reported drone strikes along roads at several southern locations, while at least one causing casualties. Earlier, the Israeli military said that air raid sirens were sounded in northern Israel, with one incident involving a suspicious aerial target resolved, while another incident was found to be a false alarm. On Wednesday, Israel and Lebanon agreed to implement a ceasefire following negotiations in Washington aimed at ending the war that flared up alongside the war in Iran. Now, according to a joint statement released with the United States, the ceasefire is contingent on a complete cessation of fire from the Iran-backed Hezbollah. The two sides, which do not have formal diplomatic relations, also agreed to create pilot zones in which the Lebanese armed forces will take exclusive control of the territory to the exclusion of all non-state actors. The statement also said that the two sides have agreed to reconvene for more talks on the 22nd of June, with a view towards reaching a comprehensive agreement. Israel and Lebanon had previously agreed to a cessation of hostilities in April, which was later extended in May. However, violence had continued despite the agreement. Barely hours after the announcement of a new truce, exchanges of fire have already begun. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has warned that any attack on Beirut would trigger a full-scale resumption of the West Asia war. Araghchi said that Iran's armed forces are ready to strike Israel if it attacks the Lebanese capital. His statement followed U.S. President Donald Trump's remarks to reporters, in which he had expressed his desire to separate talks on the conflict in Lebanon and those on the war between the United States and Iran. Listen to this.
There too, but it seems that it's heavily. We actually spoke with Hezbollah for the first time ever. We didn't know they spoke, and they agreed. Yesterday, they're not going to shoot. Israel's not going to shoot. We're just going to see. But I'd like to separate it. I'd like to have it a separate thing because it is separate.
All right, and for more on this, we're now being joined by Elijah J. Magnier. He's a war correspondent and analyst from Paris. Thank you so much for making time for us, Mr. Magnier. Now, we heard the U.S. President say that the talks on Lebanon should move independently from negotiations aimed at ending the wider U.S.-Iran confrontation. And we know that Tehran is pushing back, insisting that the two conflicts are deeply connected and warning that the continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon, they would derail diplomacy altogether. Now, in your assessment, can the Iran deal and the Lebanese ceasefire be actually separated here?
Hello, Diksha, and thank you for having me. Actually, no, it cannot be separated because there is no deal with Lebanon. It is not the meeting at the State Department that took place in the last hours. It's not an agreement of a ceasefire because Israel is still firing. It's not a detailed treaty. It's not a binding peace agreement. It's a political security framework, deliberately vague, lacks details of enforcement mechanism or verification or implementation timeline, and keep the Israelis in occupied Lebanese territory. Lebanon, as a government, doesn't have any leverage against Israel to force the withdrawal and protect its territory. However, Iran has, because the warning that Iran issued when Israel threatened to bomb Beirut and the suburb of Beirut, it means that Iran is really ready to go to war against Israel, but also against the U.S., because it is inevitable that the U.S. will not leave Israel on its own, and is ready to defend its strongest ally in Lebanon, Hezbollah. Therefore, no, the two paths cannot be separated.
Right, we hear you, Mr. Magnier, but we understand that now Israel and Lebanon, they have agreed to implement this US-mediated ceasefire with the arrangement contingent on a complete cessation of attacks by Hezbollah. But now the key question is whether Hezbollah sees itself as bound by these commitments emerging from, the Lebanese-Israeli talks, and what would determine whether the group ultimately abides by this framework here?
It is not. Hezbollah will not accept because there is no deal so far. It is just an agreement between the Israeli and the Lebanese that Hezbollah will stop firing, but not Israel. That Israel will, according to the State Department communique that was issued, the Israelis will make sure that Hezbollah can no longer reproduce itself or rearm itself or start again its presence. We're talking about 30% of the Lebanese population. We're not talking about few militants that one can remove and ship outside the country. Hezbollah has an embedded sovereignty, has a social network. It is part of the Lebanese population, and the Lebanese government cannot impose on one of the largest part of the population to deliver its weapon when it's constantly bombed. The agreement or the kind of agreement that was voiced by the Americans doesn't stop Israeli from bombing. And what the Israelis are bombing today, they're not really bombing Hezbollah, they're bombing the entire Shia area in the south of Lebanon because there are paramedic hospitals, schools, etc. And all these do not belong to Hezbollah. So it's deliberately vague agreement that they will reach on the 22nd of June. But the first draft that was issued by the State Department in the US is really giving nothing to Lebanon, but giving all the advantages to Israel without asking the Israeli withdrawal.
Right, and many analysts in fact argue that Israel may be seeking to maximize pressure on Hezbollah before any potential diplomatic breakthrough with Iran, which alters the strategic landscape here. Would you agree with that assessment? Do you see any evidence of that dynamic at play here?
Well, the dynamic that we see now is Hezbollah is trying to increase the cost on the Israeli presence on a very small scale because Hezbollah is a non-state actor and it's not up to the Israeli forces. On the other hand, the Israelis are maximizing the pressure and the cost on the Shia community that hosts Hezbollah, that Hezbollah is part of, to impose on Hezbollah a kind of rule of engagement where it is going to raise the cost of the war on the society, preventing the Lebanese Southerners from returning to their home or the reconstruction. So the only dynamic that we see today is the language of war on both sides. And this is not where Hezbollah is going to surrender because Hezbollah has an ideology where it doesn't see losses but sacrifices. And the Lebanese Shia society feels threatened in its existence when there were voices in Lebanon in November 2024 talking about shipping them outside Lebanon to Iraq. We're talking about few million people, or to Iran. So this is why they are ready to accept the cost. And the complaint comes out only at the end of the war. That's my experience in more than a dozen wars. People do not complain during the war. They think about their own survival. So everything Israel is doing and the Americans actually is not the way. The best way was between the 15 month of ceasefire, October 2024 and February 2026, when Hezbollah did not fire a bullet. The Lebanese government has ample time to agree with Hezbollah, the complete withdrawal, the giving up of its weapons south of the Litani River, but Israel occupied 5 hills and was not ready to give any concession to the Lebanese government to empower it.
Of course, and we also understand that the pressure is mounting with the United States. And now to go back to the core tension here, what do you make of the U.S. efforts to separate the Lebanon, ceasefire from the broader Iran negotiation? Is this simply perhaps a pragmatic attempt to make this highly complex regional crisis more manageable by chunking it? Or does it reflect the recognition that these interconnected conflicts, they do require different diplomatic approaches and timelines, which, as we have seen, the United States does not seem to have the correct tools at the moment to tackle at this point?
This is much deeper than that, because we're talking about the axis of the resistance that was not active until June 2025 after the war on Iran. And this is where the Iranian understood the necessity to support its allies, really not with only narrative, but also effectively to protect them. Lebanon doesn't have any card. The only card that Hezbollah has is Iran. Iran has the Strait of Hormuz as a leverage and managed to hold its ground from following the US-Israeli attacks. Therefore, Iran can actually dictate its conditions on the Americans, and this is why the Americans and the Israelis are trying to split both Iran from Lebanon and Lebanon from Iran, taking on the side the Lebanese government and making a deal with a government that has no power over a non-state actor as it is Hezbollah. This is not going to work. It works by narrative, discourse, agreement on black and white, but not on the ground.
Those are all very fair points, Mr. Magnia. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your insights with us. But of course, we'll have to wait and see how the situation pans out from here on.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.